I was too young, at least according to them, to suffer from any like health consequences. So they just said take these basically these medications and don't even bother coming back because this is just hemorrhoids. You don't have to worry about anything. He laughed in my face and he said like, no, there's nothing you can do about this. This is something that's chronic. They see this as, oh, he just did a diet. That's everything. But they don't realize that I cured disease.
Welcome, everybody. Today we have with us San, who is currently in Sweden, and he's going to share with us, I think, a pretty compelling story. San, maybe start out by just telling us a little bit about your background, who you are, and then we can get into your particulars of what happened to you.
Yeah, of course. First and foremost, thank you so much for having me on, Doctor. It's a pleasure and an honor being here. So my name is San, as Dr. ShawnBaker mentioned. I'm 27 years old currently, and I live in Sweden. My background, well, I've been carnivore now for well over 3 years. I think 3.5 years to be exact. And I've always been an athletic dude. Always loved just like health and nutrition overall. And I came into the world of carnivore because of my health issues, which I will get into later.
So, you're relatively young, and I kind of know a little bit what you're dealing with, and it's interesting because it does seem to affect a lot of younger folks, and it's tragic what typically will happen, and you may have some insight into this because you suffered with it. But I guess we'll get into, because I mean, ulcerative colitis was one of the issues you were dealing with. Maybe we can start there. How did you realize? When did you first notice something was wrong, and how did that evolve?
Yeah, of course. So my story is like pretty long because it actually started way before, like way earlier than I noticed my symptoms, right? So growing up, I'll start at the age of like 17. I was very like skinny, malnourished, and short. I want to say like I was kind of underdeveloped in my teenage years. So this led me down the path of like working out and going to the gym and everything in between. Now, when I started going to the gym, the most obvious thing was, okay, how do I pack on like muscle and size? Well, the bodybuilding community, they talk a lot about chicken, rice, broccoli, and supplementation such as creatine, amino acids, gainers, all sorts of processed junk food in all honesty. Now, when I started working out, I weighed 56 kilos. As I mentioned, I was like malnourished and underdeveloped as a 17-year-old. And after 2 years, I managed to pack on, let's see here, approximately 50 extra kilos, which, left
Wow.
me, yeah. So I was basically 105 kilos at the most. So within 2 years, I became pretty fat, obese, whatever you want to say.
Okay.
And obviously that came with a lot of health issues. Now, I didn't, realize what type of health issues I had in the beginning because, I was so locked into like my goal and whatever. But the first symptoms that I started to notice was when I went to the bathroom, there was like blood in my stools. And before that, it was kind of weird because I never had any gut issues prior. Like I was never bloated, not to my knowledge at least. I never had gut pain, which most sufferers of IBD do. So the first symptoms that I noticed was blood in my stools. And I thought to myself, this is not normal. Obviously, I did know that some people might suffer from hemorrhoids, especially when you're consuming a lot of grains and vegetables and fibrous foods. So that was like my first thought, right? So what I did was I went to the hospital just to get a checkup, and their first reaction was like they didn't even really like examine me. What they did was they looked at me, they looked at my age because at this time I was like 20, 21 or 20, I think. And I was too young, at least according to them, to suffer from any like health consequences. So they just said, this is just hemorrhoids. Take these basically these medications, and don't even bother coming back because this is just hemorrhoids. You don't have to worry about anything. Well, I went home that day and I took the medication that they gave me, and it didn't work obviously because they gave me medication for hemorrhoids while my issues were actually ulcerative colitis, and the medication for the hemorrhoids didn't do anything, quite literally. So within like a month or so, I went back because I was worried the symptoms just progressively got worse, as you might know. And they told me, okay, look, we can maybe do like a colonoscopy just to check things. But as we told you before, you're very young, so we don't think you're uh, in a risk of having some form of like IBD. Now, I was scheduled to do a colonoscopy at this time. I went to the hospital in order to get a colonoscopy, But lo and behold, I came there. The doctor came and he saw me and he was like, you know what? I still think you're too young for this. I don't think you have any IBD or anything. I think we're gonna up the dosage of the medication and give you a stronger one, but basically the same one for hemorrhoids. And I took that medication. I went home, and nothing improved. Now at this time, I was kind of fed up with the medical establishment because I thought, they're not taking me seriously. I'm here suffering. They're kind of just, you know, they're being aloof to my symptoms, if that makes sense. So I really didn't care anymore. I just went about my life, and obviously the symptoms got worse. But what happened after this is pretty remarkable. So I started to suffer from like anxiety and psychiatric disorders out of nowhere, literally out of thin air. I would just wake up one day and I would have full blown anxiety, even signs of like depression and just like psychiatric disorder, full blown symptoms. And my first like initial thought was I've heard about the gut and brain axis. So when you suffer from gut issues of all sorts, you can also experience some like psychiatric disorders, but this was fairly new at the time, at least in Sweden, to my knowledge. So when I when I was talking to the doctors about like my gut issues and my mental health and how they're maybe like correlated, they didn't even take me seriously. To be honest, they kind of looked at me, especially the psychiatrist I was seeing. She was kind of saying that it's mostly like pseudoscience and it's not really logical to be suffering from gut issues and that's like supposed to be correlated with psychiatric disorders. She thought it was mostly just in my brain, and that I had to take like the antidepressive medication for the symptoms. So as I said, like I kept on telling them like, look, can we just maybe do a colonoscopy or something just to see if my gut issues have anything to do with it? But they thought it was like a waste of time and whatnot. So I actually ended up getting on a medication called olanzapine, which is a medication for bipolar disorder. The thing is, I never actually got a diagnosis for my psychiatric disorder. They never knew what it was until this day. Now, obviously, right now I've been medication free for well over 3 years, but till this day, I don't even know what type of psychiatric disorder I had. And then basically, what happened was after I think 2 or 3 years after this event that I'm describing, that's when they started to take my gut issues seriously because I was doing a like yearly checkup with my blood markers, and they noticed I had anemia, like pretty severe anemia to be a like 22-year-old male. So they were like, okay, you're having anemia, and to me, I didn't even know what the word anemia meant. So when they described, you basically are losing blood, I told them like, yeah, I've been suffering from gut issues for I don't know 3 4 years, and I've been to this hospital talking about this, and they have seen it, and you know almost every doctor that I've been to have just told me this is just hemorrhoids. So yeah, that's basically when my story kind of starts with a health journey. Because as I mentioned before this, I didn't even know how severe my issues were because the hospital didn't really take them as serious. Um, so that kind of led me down the path of carnivore, I guess.
Okay. And with ulcerative colitis, and then it's kind of interesting they just threw you on a, psychiatric med without a diagnosis. Well, we don't know this. Here, try this and see what happens. And um, did it help, by the way? I mean, did the olanzapine, did it have any benefit for you?
So the thing is, as I mentioned, like my major symptoms that I was suffering from was like anxiety and depression like symptoms. Now, one thing I did notice with the olanzapine was it made me really sleepy. So it helped me fall asleep because I was kind of suffering with some form of insomnia because of the anxiety. But I talk about this a lot with my family members and other people that I talk to regarding psychiatric disorders. That the medications when it comes to psychiatric disorders, it kind of makes you into a zombie. Like this is a well-known phenomenon. People lose empathy. People lose feelings. Like I felt like a robot. And to be quite honest, like I can't remember most of the years that I was on olanzapine because it's all like I was in a coma, if that makes sense. It doesn't. I don't know. I can't remember most of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're kind of sedated. And I mean, that's what
Yeah.
some of these drugs, they kind of do. I mean, a lot of people complain about the numerous side effects, weight gain, sexual dysfunction, inability to, even, think with some of these things. And so obviously not a good solution long term, regardless of what the problem is for most people. Um, when you were, having your gut issues, how often were they concerned about what you were eating at all, or was that discussed much? What was the thought around that?
Yeah, so obviously, as most people on the carnivore, like at least in the carnivore community, are aware of, most doctors don't think that nutrition plays a role in any type of disease, like whether it's diabetes, whether it's gut issues, joint pain, whatever. It's never diet, at least to them. So when I asked them, well, obviously this is a gut issue, could my diet impact this, like for better or for worse? And I guess like you could call him the head doctor. He laughed at my face, sorry, in my face, and he said like, no, there's nothing you can do about this. This is something that's chronic. Like we barely know anything, and we are the experts. But all we know is that diet does not play a role in this. Like no matter what you eat, it won't like impact you negatively or positively.
Okay. And surprisingly, that is the standard answer from most gastroenterologists, particularly dealing with things like ulcerative colitis or the other inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease. They say, well, it's nothing, diet really doesn't matter. And because they haven't found diets that really work very well for it. So they say, well, it can't be diet because we've tried Mediterranean diets. Everybody knows a Mediterranean diet is the cat's meow or something like that. But if that doesn't work, then diet doesn't work, right? So you start saying, okay, well, I'm not getting anywhere with the standard healthcare regimen. They're not really helping me out. I'm still sick. I don't feel good. I feel like a zombie. Um, what was the decision that made you say, look, I'm going to start taking this into my own hands? Was there like a turning point where you say, I'm just fed up with this stuff? Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker here. Hey, if you or someone you love is suffering from chronic disease and you're tired of just managing symptoms with potions, pills, and procedures, I want you to check out Revero.com. Our team of dedicated professionals is committed to tackling the root cause of your issue and finally getting you healthy. Hurry up, though. Our spaces are filling up very quickly.
Yeah, so when I got diagnosed, I like when I started taking medication and whatever, I started with a medication. I can't even remember what it's called, but I was on prednisone for some while, which obviously is probably one of the best but also worst medications in any type of autoimmune and inflammation disease. What I noticed with the prednisone was, of course, like they worked maybe for the first 2 weeks because I was on a cycle, I think for 8 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. So they did work for 2 weeks, but after that, nothing worked. And after prednisone, what they usually do is they put you on biologics. And biologics, the only thing that I felt when I took these biologics, because it's like an injection you take. I think I took them maybe twice a month or something, if I'm not mistaken. But the only thing I noticed was it felt like I was about to have a fever every single day because it basically lowers your immune system. And the symptoms overall didn't even improve. Like I wouldn't say they got worse, but they didn't improve. And after a specific certain time, and after you've tried almost every type of medication, especially biologics, because I believe that's the last stage before they kind of go into surgery and whatnot. And when I've tried everything, especially the biologics, they told me like, look, nothing's working. We noticed that even if we give you the strongest medication, it works for like 1 week, but then the symptoms just come back. So after maybe, I don't know, 8 or 9 months of struggling with medications, they told me like, look, we're gonna give you this last type of medication, which also was like some form of biologics, in combination with some other medication. And if this doesn't work, we're gonna have to do surgery. We're gonna have to surgically remove your colon. And that's basically when I kind of woke up, if that makes sense. Like I took my disease seriously, of course, before this, but when they mentioned surgery and removing my colon, that's when I realized the severity of it. And I kind of realized that nobody's going to help me. Like my parents are not going to help me, the doctor's not going to help me. Nobody's going to come and give me some medication or give me some diet that's going to work. I have to do research on my own. And it's quite funny because the same day, I remember the same day the doctor told me that we might have to do a surgery on you. I went to the gym after my doctor's appointment and I met one of my friends that I hadn't seen for maybe 6 months because he was actually working in another city at this time. I saw him and he looked amazing. What I mean by that is he was kind of glowing. He was also shredded, whereas beforehand he was kind of bloated, bulkier physique. But this time, as I mentioned, he was glowing, like glowy skin, healthy hair. He just looked healthy. So obviously, I had to ask him, like, are you doing something like special, or like, is it just some diet you're doing? And he told me about the carnivore diet. Obviously, at this time, I had already watched your interview, I believe, on Joe Rogan, and also um, Jordan Peterson and Michaela Peterson. But since I came from a bodybuilding background, I was brainwashed. I thought that you needed carbohydrates. So keto and carnivore, it never, it never made me interested in even looking at those types of diet. But since he looked amazing, and since I kind of had some form of social proof that it works, I thought to myself, maybe I can go home and research. So for the for the next 2 weeks, what I did was I just researched everything. I read studies, I educated myself, I watched tons of YouTube videos, of course, and I started watching at this time specifically Dr. Anthony Chaffee because he was fairly new back then. I remember, and he had one good video that I specifically remember watching where he basically was talking about tips and tricks for beginners when it comes to carnivore. And before I started doing the carnivore, because I was 100% in on it, like I already had convinced myself. I knew all the research, I knew all the risks, so called, and I was basically convinced. But before this, I had one last appointment with a dietitian at at the hospital. And when I told him about this, it was the reaction I got was the normal reaction you get from the hospital. Like he looked at me like I was crazy. He told me about the colon cancer risk because I already was suffering from ulcerative colitis. He said this can get worse, of course, and then he recommended that I should increase my vegetable oils consumption, like seriously, and grains and lots of fiber because it soothes the colon and helps the gut basically work, and it can lower inflammation. And we had an interesting talk because, as I said, I literally almost studied for 2 weeks. So everything he said, I knew how to debunk the claims he made. But nevertheless, I went home that day and, I went cold turkey. Like I quit everything, sodas, junk food, everything overnight. And I just did the Lions diet, basically.
Let me interrupt you there for a
Yeah,
second.
sure.
The point where you said, "Look, I've been on prednisone. I've taken all these biologics. Nothing's working. You're on the verge of surgery." 99% of the people that were in your position will proceed to surgery. They'll lose their colon, and the rest of their life they'll be, having to go to the bathroom in an ileostomy bag. Right? I mean, this is what most of these people that come to this point receive. And had you not intervened, that's where you'd be today. You'd be walking around, having to go defecate into a bag. Um, the fact that you know that is such a common occurrence, and then you go to see the dietitian, and they give you what I think is probably the worst advice possible. I mean, it's just like, yeah, we need to increase your fiber, your grains, your seed oils. I mean, it just shows you how far away we are from actually being serious about treating these diseases as a healthcare system in general, because it just doesn't work, and it hasn't worked, and it never works. And it's just one of those things where time and time again, these people get sick. I have no doubt if you had followed her advice today, you'd be without a colon. You'd be and you'd still be alive, hopefully, but your quality of life would be greatly diminished. And I always feel sorry for people that I meet them after they've had the colectomy, and they still have to change the diet because they're still suffering, even though they've cut out half their bowel or a large part of their bowel. And I mean, that what's done is done. You can't reverse that. I mean, once it's out, it's out. I mean, you can unhook and hook somebody back up, but I mean, once you take out that whole colon, there's nothing you can do. Um, it's an absolute tragedy. And to think that we're even in 2025 with as much information as that we've been trying to put out there, and it just shows you how much more work we need to do. Because I mean, I've been beating this drum for almost a decade now, and a lot of people have joined me. Chafee and a lot of the other guys that have subsequently joined what we started. I helped start a few years, 10 years or so ago. Okay, so you go to the dietitian, you say, "No, thank you. I ain't doing what your craziness is doing." So start cold turkey. So then what happens?
Yeah, and I just want to say I totally agree with you with the whole like quality of life because people they don't realize that just because you're cutting out your colon, like your symptoms they may improve, but I think they're always going to come back, to be honest. Especially like if you have Crohn's, for example, that can manifest in the small intestine as well. So yeah, but when it comes to me, especially as I said, I went home that day cold turkey, everything, and I started eating. I started with like just ground beef and nothing else because I didn't know that, oh, you're supposed to consume a lot of fat. So I just consumed ground beef and nothing else in the beginning, and I felt amazing, honestly. Even like I want to say I was pretty low fat, but I just felt amazing. And after a while, I had this like monthly checkups. So every month I would have one or two checkups at the hospital just to see my symptoms and see if my inflammation was getting worse or better. And after like I think 3 weeks, I was going back, and the inflammation was still there, and it hadn't gotten worse, but it hadn't gotten better. So it was kind of neutral, right? And at this point, I was kind of taken back and kind of disappointed because I expected results like this, like everybody does. So what I did was I actually emailed Dr. Anthony Chafee at this time, and he replied. Thank God for that, because I told him about my concerns. I was like, "Look, doc, I'm gonna be honest. I'm losing hope in this diet because I've been on this for 3 weeks, and my symptoms, they have gotten better, but the doctor says that my inflammation is still severe." And Dr. Anthony Chafee, he like called me down. He told me like, "Look, man, just stick with it, and trust me. Like within 2 or 3 months, I promise you, when you do a biopsy, no sign of inflammation, no sign of disease." So obviously, I trusted him, and you know, maybe a month later, went back to the hospital. The inflammation was still there, but it was significantly lower. And the doctors, like, they kind of asked me, oh, maybe this combination of medication is working. However, what they didn't know was that I actually stopped taking medication because I trusted my instincts, and I also trusted the protocol and the diet. So I hadn't been on medication for maybe 2 months at this time. And I told them, privately, because I had a doctor over there that I trusted a lot. So I told him privately, and he kind of told me, okay, obviously I can't recommend you to not take your medication, but I kind of see why you're not taking the medication. After, I want to say 3 months, I think, yeah, 3 months or so. Do you hear me, by the way?
I can hear you. Yeah, I mean, let me just another comment. The doctor says, I can't not recommend you to not take the medication. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not working. It has side effects. It has costs. Why can't he tell you not to take the medication? It's not working. And he's like, well, even though it's not working and there's side effects and it costs a lot of money, I can't tell you to not take this medicine. It's so stupid. I mean, it just pisses me off when I hear stuff like that. You're here telling him, look, I am getting better. Well, anyway, I'll let you continue. But I mean, when someone says, I can't tell you not to take medicine, like there's some law that says you have to make patients take medicine for the rest of their life, or we'll take away your license or kill you or some craziness. Yeah, he can say, hey, it's not working, don't take it. I mean, I would tell my patients that don't do something that doesn't work. It's stupid, right? But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah,
Getting
no
all
worries.
fired
No,
up on this.
yeah, of course. No, I agree, because like another funny thing is the same doctor. Speaking of funny things that he said, was when I told him about my diet, because I told him, obviously I'm not taking medication, but you can see that my symptoms are improving, and he's like, yeah. And I told him, okay, so don't you want to know what I'm doing? And obviously he said, yeah, yeah, of course. Like you can tell me what you've been doing. And I was like, okay, I'm doing something extreme, but I didn't want to tell him straight up, so I kind of warmed him up. So I told him I'm doing a variation of keto. So he said, okay, keto. So vegetables, lean meats, chicken, beef maybe. I looked at him and I was like, kind of, yeah, but imagine like keto except no lean meats, a lot of saturated fat, like a lot of ribeyes, and no vegetables. And he looked at me and I was like, okay, so you're only consuming meat. I told him straight up, yeah. And he looked at me and asked, okay, but what about your B vitamins? He asked me about my B vitamins when I said I only consume red meat, and that like should tell you how much doctors know about nutrition. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, well, and as a physician, I mean, this just wasn't what we're taught. I mean, we're not taught. I mean, we're taught a little bit about nutrition.
Yeah,
Major vitamin deficiencies, a few things about it. Don't eat saturated fat.
yeah,
Seems to be, but I mean, we're not taught about how you can use nutrition to treat disease. I mean, this is not in the wheelhouse, because we're taught how to diagnose stuff, what drugs you can give for it, or what procedures you can do. And that is what you're going to get when you go to a physician. That's all they know. I mean, for the most part, unless they self-educate, like myself and many of us other ones have done. It's not surprising to me that they're clueless and couldn't tell you the difference between a fat soluble and a water soluble vitamin. Some of them, or what know which one is which, or what foods have what in it. They just don't. It doesn't. It doesn't pay their bills. It doesn't really behoove them to do so. It's like you might as well be talking to the plumber about this stuff. I mean, when it comes to that. So, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So after exactly 3 months, I believe all of my symptoms vanished. And as I said, like week by week, I would just see more and more improvements, and especially in my mental health. Like I became so like sharp, no brain fog, no anxiety. I could basically do anything I wanted to. Like I could talk to people, no social anxiety, whatever. And when it came to my gut issues, as I said, after 3 months, I got a call from the hospital, and it was my doctor, and he was like, do you have time to talk?" And I told him, "Yeah." And he said, sorry, he asked even, "What have you been doing for the past 3 months?" And I asked him, "Okay, like, why do you want to know?" He told me that my results, my inflammation markers and my blood markers are fine. Like they're perfect, like pitch perfect. No inflammations, no sign of gut issues whatsoever. And he wanted to know what I've been doing, obviously. So I told him the honest answer, and I think he was kind of taken back. However, as we spoke about just right now, I think because they don't, learn anything about nutrition, and quite the quite the opposite, they're taught that red meat is dangerous. He didn't take me seriously, and I think it's pretty sad because I know he has other patients, and I was like, could you just maybe at least recommend them, like your other patients, to look into autoimmunity and gut issues and whatever, and looking into carnivore as an form of relief or whatever. Obviously, I don't know if it did that, but yeah, that's kind of how it went. As I mentioned, after 3 months, I had no issues whatsoever, and my skin also, by the way, was horrible back then. I used to have like severe acne, and that's also a part of gut issues. I believe we now are well aware of. Everything within 3 months was resolved.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. I see it all the time. And this is one. And in fact, in my opinion, I think that inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, and ulcerative colitis are probably the best case scenario for a strict carnivore diet. I think there's, I'll be bold to say that may be the best treatment for a huge percentage of the people, and to not know about it as a gastroenterologist is somewhat, I mean, it's troubling that they don't even know about this, most of them, and then to not recommend it as perhaps a first line treatment, because you think about it. I mean, you by the skin of your teeth basically avoided losing your colon had you not just by luck, by chance, by your own desire to look for things. If you'd have just blindly followed the doctor, you wouldn't have a colon today. You'd be sitting there, pooping in a bag, and it's just it's tragic that so many people do that. And these people just basically mismanage, as far as I'm concerned, or they lose this opportunity to greatly improve people's lives. That's why I'm super happy we started Revero, and we've got physicians who do this on a daily basis, which is cool. But we're not in Sweden, and we can't reach the whole world, but we're trying as much as we can. So obviously, I'm glad that you actually, because a lot of people, I've talked to a lot of folks in similar situations, whether it's Crohn's or something else, and they just say, screw the medical system. I'm not even going to go back. And then they cure themselves, and then the doctors never hear about it. So I'm glad at least you went there and said, hey, look, I was able to put my disease in remission. And maybe it sticks. Maybe another year from now, another patient will tell them the same thing. And then he might finally wake up and say, hey, you know what? I'm getting a bunch of patients saying this is working. Maybe we should consider it. That's how it changes little by little. Unfortunately, we're at the front edge of this, and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort and stuff like that. So thanks for doing all that. So 3 years carnivore, you haven't died of scurvy, obviously, you haven't had a heart attack or anything like that, supposedly. And it's been, I guess, relatively sustainable for you. Well, let me ask you that. So you said you kind of a strict so-called lion diet, basically ruminant meat, which is what I'm more or less doing right now myself as a fun little thing. Were you able to evolve your diet? Were you able to reincorporate a few other things, dairy products, eggs, maybe a few, non-meat type foods in there? What's been your experience up to this point?
Yeah. So after, I guess, I started in like May 2022, and I believe by maybe like November or December, I tried to introduce raw milk, obviously, raw honey and fruits. And to be honest, like the raw honey and the fruits, they were too sweet for me. I didn't notice any type of benefits, but yeah, they're good tasting, but I didn't notice any benefit. When it came to the raw milk, I really liked the taste, obviously, but I noticed that it made my physique bulkier, whereas I prefer to be more like shredded and lean. But I did experiment with like fruits, dairy. So I've been carnivore, animal based, like Paul Saladino says. I prefer, if I'm going to be honest, to be mostly like carnivore based and not have as many fruits as possible. For example, last year, October, so almost a year ago, up until August this year, I didn't touch a single piece of fruit, and I felt amazing. But in August, I ate some like local fruits just for a month to experiment. Um, and as I said, like every time I include fruits again, sure, they taste good, but they're too sweet. Most fruits aren't even like natural; they're just loaded with sugar and also sprayed with pesticides. So I do stay on the more like the carnivore side, but I'm not like Lion's Diet strict anymore. I include cheese, butter, eggs, and I also since April of this year I've been pretty much like doing raw carnivore, just for preferences. I enjoy not cooking to be honest, and I just feel it digests even better, to be honest. And taste wise, it doesn't really bother me. I know some people don't like the taste of raw meat, but for me, it tastes neutral.
Yeah, I did that, several years ago. I tried that for about a month. I just didn't prefer it. It was harder to eat. I didn't look forward to it. So I prefer to cook my stuff. But, I guess if it's working for you, and as long as you take care to make sure it's sourced well and not contaminated, many people do fine with that. Um, since, and I don't know, are you talking about this on social media or, letting people know? And if so, have you encountered other people with similar situations that have been able to resolve their issues?
Yeah, so back in March of this year, I started a social media account. I go by the name of Flesh Fuel there. And I started just posting content about my journey, and I do like a lot of health related content. So like mostly carnivore, of course, but I also talk about other topics. And I've had a couple of clients that I help when it comes to either it's like gut issues or any type of like autoimmune issues, or maybe just want to learn about carnivore and how to do it. Because I think in the beginning, most people they kind of approach the carnivore diet the wrong way. They think they can just stack up on lean meat, use no fat source, use no electrolytes, no salt, and do fine. Whereas that's not really the reality of things. And I think having someone in the beginning just to like teach you the basics is crucial. So I've encountered a lot of people, to be honest, that have had similar issues. Some might even have worse issues, but some people that have less symptoms than I did, I usually encourage them by saying, "Look, if I was this close to getting my bowels removed, I can guarantee you, like you will be able to reverse this. It all just takes time. You got to stick with it for at least I'd say 3 months. Stick with it, never give up, and if you want help, just reach out to anybody that's an expert in this field."
Yeah. Well, good for you for doing that. I think that's great. I mean, like I said, we are making a difference little by little. I mean, and you're still in Sweden? Is that right?
Yep, correct.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's a pretty strong push, particularly from the environmental side, to make people stop eating meat. Throughout Scandinavia, there's a this so-called Eat Lancet Commission, which is largely controlled by a gal named Gunhild Stortelen, who's a physician from Norway, who's also married to a billionaire, and she's like a vegan activist type person, and they're trying to push this global diet for sustainable humanity, and they want us all to be vegetarians and eat like a few molecules of red meat and like 2 eggs a week or something like that. Are you seeing that being pushed throughout where in Sweden currently?
Yes, sadly, yes, definitely. So the recommendation from the government is actually 350 grams of red meat per week.
Hmm.
And that's just insane because, for breakfast I eat 500 grams, and then for dinner I'll have another 500 grams. So I'm breaking the weekly limits just by consuming my breakfast. And this is sad because obviously hospitals and schools primarily, like young kids, they're getting a lot of like vegetarian foods and vegan foods, and it's not like obviously they're not going to develop well if they consume those types of foods in the early stages. So yeah, I do see a push of it, and it's sad. But you know, I want to say that most people they aren't, that scared of red meat, so they do consume more than 350 grams. But obviously, nobody's like carnivore here. It's very rare to hear that somebody's carnivore.
Yeah, I mean, and I've met a few folks from Sweden that are, there. In fact, there's a fella that was going to host an event in Sweden, a carnivore event, and it was during COVID, and so it got canceled. They
Wow.
rented a place down there in the south of Sweden, I think, and unfortunately, it got canceled due to COVID stuff. So there are a few. I mean, there's plenty of people all over the world. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people in Sweden, so you can't know all of them. But it's one of those things where um, 350 grams, for those people that don't do metric system like us in the United States. I mean, that's less than a pound. I mean, that's for the whole week. And well, I mean, the reality is here in the US, the average American consumes around 2 ounces of red meat a day, which, is about a pound and a half, for the week. So we're not much. I mean, we're a little more than that, but we're considered high red meat eating countries. And that's still an abysmally small amount. It's just not enough. And that's why so many people have B vitamin deficiencies, particularly B12. I mean, because and iron deficiencies and all these things are cropping up because we underconsume that. Um, so you're 3 years in, no relapses. I mean, did it just go away and never come back? I mean, are you completely like good to go as long as you eat, because some people will say, well, you're not cured because you can't eat junk food anymore. And I don't know what are your thoughts on that? Or have you ever, I mean, like, most people that do a carnivore diet from time to time will have something off carnivore. I mean, I do myself. I've mentioned that sometimes I'll have a piece of cake once, a couple times a year or something like that. I generally do pretty well with that. It doesn't bug me much. I was in Paris and that messed me up for whatever reason. That day of eating messed me up when I went off plan. But generally, I'm okay with that. But do you find that your gut is generally pretty good all the time now?
Yeah, like to be honest, I've never, cheated once, if that's the correct word to use. So,
Okay.
so I've never had like junk food since then, because like obviously I'm not gonna lie and say a pizza doesn't sound tasty and it doesn't taste tasty, because it does. It tastes amazing. But for me, it's more about like the principle. Like I've been unhealthy, I know how it feels, and being healthy is the best thing ever, and feeling healthy as well. Now, when it comes to junk food, I would say like the if I consume fruits or like raw honey, that's like cheating for me. And even then, I won't get any symptoms back. I guess like if I'm making, let's say I'm eating a steak tartare at a restaurant, or if I'm making one at home and I use things like onions, I will experience symptoms, but not like gut issues. I will experience things like headaches or joint pain or just being overall tired, lethargic. But the gut issues so far, I've had zero like relapse. But as I said, I think obviously if I did consume the standard American or standard European diet again with a lot of fiber, and especially from vegetables, the symptoms would probably come back, because it's a toxicity. It's the body's natural response.
Yeah, fair enough for sure. Um, so as far as the other thing you mentioned, because you came from a bodybuilding background and you're told, hey, you can't train without carbs. You're not going to be optimal. You can't put on muscle. You're 3 years in. I assume you're still training. I hope. And what has been your experience with your ability to perform?
Obviously, like you lose a lot of weight, but people tend to think that you lose muscle as well, but that's not true. Like in my case, as I mentioned, I was like 100 kg. Right now, I'm probably like 75-ish kg. And I'm as lean as ever, and I feel amazing. The thing with me, like when I include fruits before my workouts, the workout doesn't become as optimal as if I'm just like fat driven, if that makes sense. Because when I'm just doing carnivore, like strict carnivore, I feel that I can go without any type of food, any type of craving for 14 hours and then work out. Like even after 14 hours of no food, I can work out, because when you're driven by fat, it's something insane. It's like Dr. Anthony Chaffee says, you're at the gym for endless periods of time. Like I could be there for 5 hours if I want. Whereas when I consume fruits, I notice I need something to replenish like glycogen. So that's pretty interesting. Strength wise, I haven't really noticed much loss in strength, to be honest. I'd say I'm pretty much like maybe the same or even stronger in some aspects. But yeah, physique wise, it's like night and day, to be honest. being lean all the time and not having to deprive yourself of food, because obviously these bodybuilders, when they diet for a show, they're depriving themselves of food. Whereas I just eat a ribeye and I'm full for the rest of the day.
Yeah, fair enough. And what has been the response to the people that are around you, family members, friends, I don't know, coworkers, whatever? I mean, obviously they might have seen you at your worst. Now they're seeing you clearly better, I assume. How's that gone?
Yeah, so obviously my family members, they've probably seen the most insane amounts of transformation because I live with them. Coworkers as well. But most people, they don't understand how diet and lifestyle can impact your life overall. They think it's just, they see this as, oh, he just did a diet, that's everything. But they don't realize that I cured diseases. Like, I just, as you mentioned, I was this close of getting my bowels removed surgically. Whereas now I'm healed, I feel amazing, I just look amazing overall. But as I said, most people, they don't see this as a form of like lifestyle. They just think it's a diet.
True. Yeah, fair enough. Anything else before we wrap up? Anything else you want to share? Social media handles, if that makes sense. Anything else we didn't cover?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, on social media, Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, my name is Flesh Fueled. So you can follow me there, of course, if you want to join me on my journey.
Flesh fuel would probably trigger some people. we're often called evil necrophiles and or fresh flesh eaters and
Yeah,
all this stuff. So anyway, well, thank you, Sam, for doing this. Thank you for sharing your story just in general and getting out there. And because some people, they don't want the heat, they don't want the attention, but I think putting yourself out there, putting your story out there, undoubtedly will impact some people and save lives, quite honestly. So thank you very much for doing that.
yeah. Thank you for having me on. And as you said, I hope more people listen to this and they improve their lives.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.